Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. The format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a work session on middle housing code amendments. There are a couple housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of first. Thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speakers queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When the public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it's your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. Finally, I want to thank everyone for your patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work within this new virtual meeting format. As always, feel free to contact the staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item A, public comment, an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics, except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. The Planning Commission reserves 10 minutes for public comment, and generally the time limit is 3 minutes, and I think we'll be okay with that. The Planning Commission reserves the option to reduce the time allowed, but we're not going to do that based on the number of people. As a reminder, your hand must be raised. When it's your turn and your microphone has been unmuted by staff, please state your name clearly before beginning your comments. Staff will let you know when your time is up. When your time has concluded, the moderator will mute your microphone and move on to the next speaker. All right, well, I see we have a couple of hands here. So let's begin public comment.
So first up, we're going to have Ed McMahon, and then we'll have Karen Knudsen. I don't know if I said that right. And then Scott Rogers.
Terrific. Ed, we're ready when you are.
Good day, Commissioners. Ed McMahon, Executive Director of the Home Builders Association of Lane County. I really wanted to testify in favor of the CNO ordinance at the April 12th council meeting, and I messed up. I was thinking it was a public hearing, it was an action item, so I missed my opportunity to testify, but I really wanted the Planning Commission to hear what I had to say, so here it goes. I'm testifying this evening to praise the staff and the Planning Commission. I closely followed the deliberations on declared objective standards. It took a few extra meetings, but I was very impressed with the process. The Planning Commission really dug deep into the CNO code. No stone was left unturned. They did their due diligence. They actually did what a Planning Commission was supposed to do. There were numerous opportunities for public comment. I encourage you to follow the Planning Commissioner's unanimous recommendation and approve the CNO standards before you this evening. And I'm very pleased to state that they followed your recommendations and they passed the CNO ordinance unanimously. Unfortunately, the ordinance may not go into effect for a while, but that doesn't take anything away from the outstanding and professional work that you did. So I thank you. Now, let's get on to messy middle housing code amendments. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ed.
So now we will have Karen.
Hi, Commissioners. Good morning, almost good afternoon. I'm Karen Knudsen, a local architect and also the founding director of Better Housing Together, which is a housing advocacy organization here in Lane County that works collaboratively to increase housing affordability, diversity, and supply. I'm also speaking today to thank you for your work on the clear and objective standards, and also to share some research that Better Housing Together has done to help us understand our history of challenges in creating clear paths to housing. The vast majority of our community wants for us to take simple, logical steps necessary to address the housing crisis and to see us move forward in ways that are thoughtful and reasonable. We have a lot of stories about why we have the housing crisis that we have. In hearing those stories, as Better Housing Together has over the past 4 or 5 years, we try to do research and bring additional insight to those narratives, and also then chart a path forward that we might take productive action from. So in 2018, we partnered with staff at the Oregon Law Center to complete a report to help us understand the influence of legal appeals on housing supply, the impact of LUBA appeals on housing supply in Lane County specifically. And what we did with this work was look at LUBA appeals from 2000 to 2018 and understand from those appeals what happened to the housing that was being appealed, and who was appealing it. Why did, which projects were being objected to, and what happened to them as a result. Did they go forward? Were they delayed? Or was the project killed? As a quick summary to that report, and we will share this to you in an email so that you have it for reference. And again, this was completed in partnership with Oregon Law Center and researchers from the University of Oregon Law School. Between 2000 and 2018, 21 housing projects totaling 2,284 housing units were appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. These 21 projects can be assigned into 2 categories of petitioners. One category is neighbors who opposed the project that was approved by the city, and the second category is developers whose applications were denied by the city. In the case of these 21 projects appealed to LUBA, 14 of the projects and of the decisions were disputed by neighbors. How that breaks down a little bit more specifically is that with these 2,284 units of housing, 37% of the appeals brought forward were by developers, totaling 841 homes that they were arguing for some reason for the city to allow them to build. And 63% of the appeals were brought by neighbors, a neighbor, or neighborhood groups. That totals 1,443 homes. It's important to note that in all 14 projects appealed by a neighbor or neighbors, there was not a single project where LUBA or the Court of Appeals ruled against the city and the developer. The decision was either affirmed in the appeals process or remanded back to the city for further consideration involving a particular aspect of the proposal. What this means as an outcome from appeals is that typically what we're seeing is extensive delay and additional cost being added to the units of housing, or the killing of projects, because the time period that it takes to resolve a LUBA appeal is significant, with decisions typically coming a year after or more after the appeal has been brought forward. So quickly to summarize, outcomes from those appealed projects are 1,484 housing units not built, and 800 homes where the housing unit was eventually built, but delayed significantly by the process. I bother to highlight this because there's one other detail that is very current to your work and events, and that's understanding how these appeals are coming forward, and specifically with regards to the clear and objective standards process. What can we expect to see with obstruction to what should be the most straightforward path that we have for permitting our housing units? I think that you've seen in the public record that there is a conversation about the potential or the threat of holding the clear and objective standards hostage via an extensive LUBA appeal, and that threat has been packaged with sort of a quid pro quo proposal to treat one neighborhood particularly or as a special interest. And if that is done, then the appeal will not be brought forward. This isn't the type of decision-making or the type of process that our community expects or is asking of you to support. So I would just highlight to you that when we have a history of one individual appealing 350 housing units between 2000 and 2018, that led to 230 of those units being delayed with significant additional cost, and 120 of those units never being built. And this is housing of all sorts of different scales. to please weigh the evidence and to think about our community's larger needs as you try to guide our policies into implementation, so that we actually do have a clear and objectives process that can support housing being constructed, and then we can start to find our way out of this crisis. Thank you.
So next we have Scott Rogers.
Members of the Planning Commission, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Scott Rogers, and I am the Director of Business Advocacy for the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce is comprised of over 1,400 businesses and members. First, thank you for your leadership on the clear and objective standards work and your proposed solutions to align with state mandates. For far too long, some members of the community have weaponized the use of discretionary and subjective criteria to deny desperately needed housing projects. This weaponization of the process has discouraged housing developers from moving forward with projects in Eugene due to increased costs, delay, and uncertainty. The fact is, we are in a housing crisis, and the community desperately needs clear leadership that prioritizes people and housing over special interests and delay. It was determined through Envision Eugene that our community will need to accommodate approximately 15,000 new homes within our urban growth boundary by 2032. Additionally, over the past several decades, we have underbuilt thousands of units, and now is not the time for business as usual. We are in a crisis, and our community can't afford to allow for a very small number of dissenting voices to delay or knock things off track. We have to be relentless in our pursuit to create policies that will allow for more housing. This is an emergency, and as our community, we should act accordingly and prioritize measures that create a clear path to more housing through focused and deliberate policies. Thank you for your time.
So I believe that's everyone in the queue. Not missing anyone. Oh, I see another hand up over here. Is that?
We have Emily Semple up.
Okay.
Sorry, Emily Semple's hand up. I'll bring her in.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I disappeared. I'm back. I hope that worked out okay. It's been that kind of morning. I wasn't planning to speak, so I wasn't ready. And I appreciate everyone coming, and I really appreciate the Planning Commission. I don't think council gives you enough credit or pays enough attention. I have a duty to represent my constituents also, and I think things should have happened earlier when the Planning Commission was looking at this. I certainly don't want to delay decisions. So I'm hoping, since council has asked the commission to look at the transition zones, that it can happen both soon and quickly. And I understand the comments, I do. So that's my request, is do it soon and quickly so we can get on, and to let you know that at least I truly appreciate your work. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Councillor Semple. I hope you're not the only one that feels that way. Sometimes we wonder, but I'm sure as councillors you have the same thing happening on your end. Commissioners, we've heard interesting testimony. Anybody? I find it frankly a lot frustrating that we've been through a process and we're at the end, and somehow we're stumbling here at the end. And I'm just not sure there's much we can do except push forward with the idea that what we did was good work, what we did was right within the context, and if there are tweaks needed that's been sent back to us by council, we'll get on those as soon as we can and put the same level of care and thought that we did into the first round. But I'm hopeful that council and others can find a way to implement this as soon as possible, because clearly it's needed. And again, as I said, we've done our work. I think it's good work, and I'm hoping that we can get out of the way and let those who need to put the ordinance in place. So that's kind of where I'm a little frustrated, a little hopeful there's a way we can get going on this. Anyone else want to comment? I see Commissioner Edwards, yes.
Hey, thanks, Chair Ramey. I just want to express my gratitude for the folks and Councilor Semple who came to provide comment today at our meeting. I definitely, I appreciate, we appreciate, we don't hear from a lot of people, so we definitely appreciate when we do. And I do want to emphasize, I have seen the research that Karin Knudsen was referring to, and the many units of housing that over, the years, the 18 years that they had looked at, that our community has been deprived of based on, an imperfect process. But I would hope that rather than think of those units as casualties of this, flawed process and delay, that maybe we could be thinking of them as a catalyst for some much needed change in how we approach the community's needs. 2 weeks ago, when council voted unanimously to support a policy that we as a group unanimously recommended, that work represented thousands of hours and years of work and a really thorough process. And we had a lot of folks that were really engaged and were tremendously helpful in enabling folks like me to understand the implications of those decisions and how they would have an impact in the community. And so I'm really appreciative of their time and their patience. And I know we may still have a little ways to go, but I am very hopeful, and I have every reason to believe that the clear and objective standards will be in place. And I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to the work that we have on our agenda today. And it's incredibly important. And, people talk about progress taking time. And I think that if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that change can actually happen in an instant. And sometimes it's just a single event that creates a need for us to completely change the way we've been doing things and see that there are other ways that really work. And I'm seeing that playing out in the community. And I'm really, really encouraged by the folks who have reached out to me personally and that are engaging in this process. And I'm feeling really good about the work that we are embarking on. And I definitely really supportive of getting more housing for more people in the community. And so thank you to all the folks that are working really hard on making that happen.
I've got Commissioner Borowski followed by Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. And thank you to the people who testified. As somebody who, lower hand, but anyways, as somebody who has sat in on quite a few of those appeals over the last 8 years, I have seen the outcomes of them. And I believe that our land use laws are there, and appeals are a part of our land use decisions. And I believe that neighborhoods and individuals definitely have the ability to appeal any land use decision because it affects them, correct? We see that there are impacts when there are developments. And that's kind of what I've seen over the last few years is a developer will go in and the neighbors or affected individuals will see what the impacts are going to be on their neighborhood. And it goes to their hearts and to their homes. And I understand that. The thing that I think would be helpful going forward is to help explain to those neighbors and those people that are affected that may want to appeal the actual things that they need to appeal on and whether or not it's going to have an impact. I think of many of the appeals that we've done and looked at, and the concerns that the neighbors have are legitimate concerns, but they're outside of the boundaries of what we can look at on appeal. And the things that they've been told that are a way to stop the development. And so for me, being clear to the people who may want to appeal early on and say, yes, I understand that access up your road is tough, and adding 20 houses up there is going to make it tougher, but that's not something that is in the code and in the law that will allow us to stop it. And so going forward and spending tens of thousands of dollars on your side to appeal it, and tens up to hundreds of thousands of dollars on the developer side to defend it, if we can come to common ground earlier and let them know, that may be helpful, because I've seen the impact on both ends, on the developers and on the neighbors. And so I don't know what the fix to that is, but I've seen the result again and again. And I just wanted to say thank you to that, and know that the neighbors do have their rights to appeal. That's something that's ingrained, and I appreciate. So thank you.
Commissioner Taylor, followed by Commissioner Fragola.
I also wanted to thank everybody for the folks who showed up today to spend the time to contribute to testimony. And what, I mean, clear and objective standards, I would love to encourage that kind of, so this is really for people listening today and for all of us to help play a role in encouraging people, one, to get more informed. Sophie's done a really, planning staff, Sophie in particular, has done a really good job, for instance, in the housing code changes as a result of House Bill 2001, 2003, and that outreach. So just encouraging people, letting people know where that information is located. So Karen provided a lot of really helpful information that's accessible, encouraging people to individually get informed and avoid listening to urban legends or somebody's perspective. Ask good questions, spend just a little bit of time understanding what the process is, what the information is, how to approach concerns. Because like Commissioner Borofsky said, when a quasi-judicial, when an application is in front of, is proposed, the appeal process is based on criteria of approval. So just understanding the process a little bit more. I know it's complicated, staff's always available, but really where I'm going with this, the House Bill 2001, 2003 process, is that staff's really been making a great effort in terms of outreach. So what I'd love to do is have this process be more effective, so that at the last, when City Council, it's front in City Council, I am hoping that we have enough individuals that are really taking responsibility to be informed and participate earlier and sooner, so that we're not in the position that we are right now with clear and objective standards. There's a lot of effort being put into this. So I encourage you all, reach out to your neighbor, talk to people. If you want any help, go to staff. You can reach out to Planning Commission if your commissioner is nearby, City Council, where are the appropriate or helpful links, etc. So let's have it be a community effort.
Commissioner Fragola.
Yes, thank you. So I also wanted to thank folks for coming today. I must say, it really concerns me to hear that we've lost the opportunity for so many homes as a result of this, and that it's also contributed to increased costs. I think it's something we should look at. However, I did just want to clarify, I attended the City Council meeting, and it was my understanding that the council passed the clear and objective ordinance. There was no amendment to it. It has been passed, and they referred a question to us. And I clearly heard some of the council members say that they wanted our feedback on it. and that we could choose or choose not to do anything to the clear and objective ordinance that they passed. Am I correct?
Commissioner Fregla, that is what happened. The council passed the complete ordinance as it is unanimously, and then did refer back section to the Planning Commission about the transition standards that we will be bringing back to you. And there's kind of a specific question, and I actually forwarded that to you all this morning. Councilor Zelinka had a clarification on it. So we'll be bringing back information and that question to you, hopefully sometime soon. We're working on getting that date, and then we will let Planning Commission, or we'll let council know what your determination or recommendation is on that topic.
But council's decision was to refer it to us. They did not give us a direction to make changes, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
They wanted to get they wanted you to relook at the question and provide information on that.
Commissioner Edwards.
Thanks, Chair Remy. I just had a quick question, and perhaps Lauren can maybe just clarify. So in the event of an appeal on the clear and objectives, there is a 21-day time limit that someone has to make an appeal. The policy, the clear and objective standards, would go into effect 30 days from when they passed it, unless there is an appeal. And if there is an appeal, then it doesn't go into effect until DLCD acknowledges it. Is that correct? Can you just answer that for the group? And can you talk about maybe a potential timeline scenarios that we're talking about, having those clear and objective standards in place and the delay that could come from that?
Sure, Commissioner Edwards. So you are correct. Just to be clear again, the council did adopt the clear and objective ordinance as written. Once the mayor signs the ordinance, then the ordinance is considered adopted but not yet effective. Our Eugene charter has a sort of default effective date of 30 days from the date of adoption. But in the case of land use ordinances, including the clear and objective ordinance, we will sometimes add a delayed effective date provision, and we did that here, so that the ordinance takes effect either the later of 30 days after adoption or upon acknowledgement by DLCD, which happens when all appeals are resolved. And we've done that in the past. It's a policy decision because it can start to get pretty messy if an ordinance takes effect. Folks want to take advantage of those new standards. Those standards are on appeal, and then something happens on the appeal and it's remanded back to the city, and you have applications that are kind of in the middle, and we're trying to figure out which standards to apply. And the biggest example of that was the land use code update in 2001, when there were, I think Alyssa might remember, 3 versions of the code that staff was trying to figure out, which one was effective for which application. So for clear and objective, we did add that delayed effective date. So if the council's decision to adopt the ordinance is appealed, and we'll know that within 21 days, the appeal has to be filed within 21 days, then the ordinance will not take effect until all of those appeals are resolved. So that could be a ways down the road, depending on what happens with the appeals. Does that answer your question?
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
So, Lauren, you might have said this. I'm looking for more of a, if there is a clear answer, it goes to Commissioner Fragala's questions. So in light of that process, because the City Council unanimously adopted the recommendations, is the date that the clock starts ticking from that night, or did City Council explicitly say that they want to see whatever process we have before they actually formally put a date or adopt that? So can you just clarify that really quickly?
Sure, Commissioner Taylor, no. That was a very short answer to a long question. The City Council adopted the ordinance, and it will take effect 30 days from the date of the mayor's signature, or whenever the appeals are resolved, whichever is later, based on the current effective date language in the ordinance. the city council's referral back to the planning commission of the question about whether transition standards are appropriate for kind of writ broadly R2 zones does not affect the timing of the clear and objective ordinance. It's a separate question. Presumably, you know, depending on what the planning commission recommendation is, if it were to implement transition standards in the R2 zone, I think we would have another ordinance and go through another process.
Okay. Well, not surprisingly, doing things of this magnitude is quite complicated. So I'm glad that have patience and we're all hanging in there, and that we have wonderful staff to keep us going in the right direction. I see we've chewed about half an hour of our time today. Anyone else have a last thought on this one, or can we move on to Terry Harding?
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Okay. Well, thank you, Siri.
Okay. Let me know if there's
again.
anything else.
Again with the Siri. Yes, so let's move on, Terry. Now that I put Siri where she belongs, let's have you lead us into agenda item C, I believe it is.
Thank you, Chair Ramey, and thanks all of the presenters for your patience. This is related and very important information that we're going through. So I appreciate Matt and Kate and Mark listening to that as we move into our update on middle housing. So I'll share my screen. I have the first part of the presentation, and then we're going to try something a little different today and have each presenter share their own screen so that I can keep better track of what's going on in the meeting. So just a sec. Okay, hopefully you all see my slides. So today our agenda is to remind you about the overall goals and status of the middle housing project. We will hear from an equity roundtable participant and then move into introducing draft code recommendations for the remainder of the housing types. So that'll be triplexes, quadplexes, and row houses, and discuss affordability strategies within the code. And we'll wrap up with next steps. As a reminder, the overall goals of the middle housing project are to comply with the House bill. Also, further our ongoing work aimed at addressing equity and affordability. And thirdly, to enable more production of diverse types of housing across Eugene. House Bill 2001 requires cities to allow more types of housing in more places. As you all know by now, cities must allow duplexes to be built on each lot. Triplexes, quads, cottage clusters, and townhouses must be allowed in residential zones that allow detached single dwellings, according to the state rules that were adopted in December 2020. Many of the rules tie back to lot size, and you can find this map showing lot sizes around Eugene on our middle housing webpage. Here's a refresher on our project phases. We've completed phase 1 and 2 and are approaching the conclusion of the code writing phase. Here's a little more detail. Planning Commission and City Council check-ins are shown on the top bar. We're here in late April, considering the first set of draft code recommendations this is kind of the second of a two-part meeting. We consider duplexes and cottage clusters at our April 13th work session, and we're discussing the remainder of the housing types today. Code products are due from our consultants in about 2 months, so we're chugging along towards the end of June 2021 with Angelo Planning Group and their team members. Then this chart, which I also showed you last time, is a preview of the adoption process from this June through next June, as the final code deadline is in the middle of 2022. As you can see, we're planning on bringing code amendments through the Planning Commission process over the summer and early fall, with the council process happening in the late fall. Particularly germane to today's conversation, our goal is to allow time for appeals, because if our local code is not in place by June 30th, 2022, the state's model code will automatically apply. You heard a comprehensive public involvement update at your March 9th meeting and a presentation on the February public engagement report at your April 13th meeting. Today's public involvement update is short. It will focus on healthy democracy activities and the equity roundtable. And in May, you'll hear another well-rounded report on all of the engagement activities and groups meeting in April and early May, including the developers focus group, local partners and boards and commissions, and online outreach. So this is my last slide before I hand it over to Mark. And I'd just like to tell you what's going on with Healthy Democracy. The panel is currently deliberating on the draft code and affordability strategies in their April sessions. The questions they're considering include, how well do the draft code recommendations support the project's values and principles? How well do the recommendations support affordability? And how should the city incorporate lessons learned from this process into future public engagement? The panel is looking forward to sharing more details at future meetings with you and the City Council. And when we have their final report, we will pass it along to you and devote meeting time to discussing it. They've had a lot of hours in small group deliberations on these questions. And now I'd like to invite Mark Young to speak about his experience on the equity panel. Mark.
Thanks, Terry. So I see some familiar faces here. So some of you might know me as a local architect, and I have that hat, but I was asked to participate in the Equity Roundtable as part of my participation in the Disorientation Asian American Film Festival of Oregon, which is not just a film festival, but we represent the Asian American community. So as part of that voice. And so I tried to take my architect hat off in participation and just sort of participate in the group. And I think in general, I'll just share some of my perspectives of the group. And it's I think it's important to have a group like this because these are even me, who's sort of privileged. We are not heard very often, and so I think the voices. You have developers, you have the homeowners, and so I think the perspective of these voices are important. And the group is made up of people who have stable housing, such as myself, to people who are not have housing that's not so stable. So actually for me, it was very eye-opening. And there's a couple of themes that came up. The biggest one, of course, is affordability, because especially with people who don't have a stable housing, just regardless of whether it's middle housing types or anything, that there are people out there who are really living on the edge, and I don't know the demographics or anything, but certainly people of color too. So affordability was probably the biggest thing, but also a couple other things was that that there's equitable integration around the town, and it's not just one neighborhood or the other. So it's seen as the whole community contributing to this acceptance. There were some stories of bias, actually, which I have not experienced personally, but definitely things that really really make you think about just that issue of equitable distribution, and when we talk about implementing, in particular, middle housing or any other changes. There are some cultural contexts about having extended families, so having housing that's available that's flexible and can expand or contract. And I think it was seen that the middle housing concept could be conducive to that. We did get into staff, Terry's group did a lot of the meetings had to do with explaining what the middle housing concept is, and we had breakout groups and discussion about that. And I think there was a very receptive, the group was in general very receptive to that. Of course, the issue of affordability and what was tantamount to that, but I think it was seen as a really a way that could more gracefully fit into more neighborhoods, and maybe a vehicle for that more equitable distribution. And I have to say that some of my comments are probably biased by, by what I do too, but because I personally also am supportive of this scale of development. Being a homeowner myself and being in a neighborhood where there's often resistance to change, a lot of that resistance has to do with scale and quality of the development that happens. And that's, and of course, as an architect, I always think that you can do it well, but then there's the balance between affordability and quality. And then to me, personally, the scale is what's appealing about this concept in terms of getting more density and maybe addressing some concerns of homeowners. So anyway, I think we have one more meeting. I don't think, we haven't had any kind of roundtable vote or thumbs up or thumbs down or anything. It's it was more just getting feedback from the group, and I feel it was a valuable exercise to go through. So thanks for letting me speak.
Chair Ramey, I think we could break for any questions that the commission has for myself or Mark before we hand it off to Matt.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you. I was trying to figure out why is Mark, that's why Mark Young is here. Terrific.
Yeah, I forgot, yeah.
Great to see you. Very, very thoughtful comments. Thank you for your input. And Terry, when there's a moment, can we do a check-in with the commission to see if any of them are able or willing to stay longer today, if that works for them? Maybe not right now, but somewhere in your presentation, can you check with us to see if we can extend it? So questions for Terry or Mark? Okay.
Oh, my hand's up.
Oh,
sorry.
there you go. Sorry. Commissioner Taylor, your hand.
It's not, I know.
It matches your wall color.
I know, I need to fix that.
I
know. I can't fix it while I'm in the city's Zoom call for some reason. So I have to do it outside of it. I wanted to ask you, Mark and Terry. Mark, thank you for coming today. It's really helpful. And what I wanted to do is find out, is there, I don't know what well, let me step back. Mark, is the group willing, it's going back to my earlier comment, and Commissioner Fragola kind of touched on kind of participation and avoiding, what I'd love to do is make sure that people are informed. We hear from a diverse group of voices and participants, especially as we go through the adoption process, which quite frankly, being on the Planning Commission, this is my second term, and just being in the profession, I find that a lot of people don't attend Planning Commission meetings. And I'd love to see that increase, especially during the adoption process. And I'd love to see it increase and during the city council process, even if it's to happen now. Like, and I know the boards and commissions and some of these subcommittees are attending city council like you are now. So I appreciate that staff is kind of encouraging reports from these boards. And I just wanted to get a sense, Mark, if you, and I know it's time consuming and not everybody has the time. So I'm just wondering if there's any kind of, if there's a process or a willingness to continue continue to participate and kind of what that looks like. And maybe staff can address that. And then Mark, whatever kind of insight you have would be helpful.
I mean, I found that people whose voices aren't heard are often just busy living. And, you know, I have the privilege of having a flexible time schedule and being able to do these because the word did go out to who wants to speak at a group like this. And I'm not sure how much response there was. I know you've had a couple people speak before, but I know that even our meetings are hard to schedule because people have kids and, you know, they're living life. And so, or they're trying to live life. So that's a challenge, I think.
I would just add that you might recall that we specifically with the Equity Roundtable and the Healthy Democracy Panel are compensating people for their time. So with the Equity Roundtable, it's a stipend award to the organization that the person represents. And for Healthy Democracy, it's an hourly stipend. And so that money will run out before the adoption process. And I think it's a very good point, Commissioner Taylor, that we do need to figure out how to keep the voices that we have invested in raising involved. And so that's some work for staff to think about as we kind of turn the corner here. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski, followed by Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you. This is a question for Terry. And it goes to the timeline and the code writing aspect of this. So at our last presentation, we talked about duplex, and I'm just going to bring up an example for you and then just ask you to weigh in on that. So last time we talked about duplexes and we went through on this is, you know, incentivize or this or that. And one of the areas was, do we want to do detached or attached duplexes, correct? And so now I'm just wondering if that is getting written into code from the meeting that we had last time, right? And when and where, I mean, are we going to go through this code line by line as a planning commissioner and have up and down votes on these types of things? Or did you get a recommendation from us that, yes, we want detached duplexes to be allowed? How does that play out as far as the Planning Commission's role in approving and recommending this code to City Council?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Good question. We're sort of in the middle of gathering your feedback on all of the housing types. So we haven't made any final decisions on what would be presented going forward. We're still incorporating your feedback from the last meeting. Today, we'll hear about the rest of the housing types. And then you have a meeting scheduled for May 17th, where we're going to bring refined everything to you. And then we will have opportunity for you to see the actual code line recommendations. So yes, it's similar to Clear and Objective. We'll need to bring you the actual proposed code for your recommendations as we kind of turn the corner into the adoption process.
And the timeline for that will be by the end of June?
Well, by the end of June, we'll have a finished product from the consultant team, and we'll do a handoff to city staff. And so we'll still be able to make changes as we turn it into an adoption package and then run it through the formal process starting in the summer.
Commissioner Edwards.
Thanks, Chair Ramey. I have a question. I think it's for Terry. It's really about maybe how we're talking about this work with stakeholders, and because I think that we're getting a lot of feedback from community members, and there seems to be a lot of emphasis on housing being ill-aligned with what households can afford, which is also often framed as a problem that more low-income subsidized housing is intended to solve. And I feel like that is actually just a small piece of the problem that House Bill 2001 really is aiming to address, which is creating more different types of housing for more different types of households across the spectrum, because right now we have a largely one-size-fits-all approach to housing, and not everybody is an upper middle class family of 4 with their 2 cars and their 3 kids and the 1.5 pets or whatever. And so I'm just wondering if we're actually talking about the issue that House Bill 2001 and the middle housing work is looking to actually solve, which again is creating that diversity, because we've got all those gaps. And so I'm curious, you know, are we looking for representation from different types of households, maybe, you know, a single person or a widower or things like that? I mean, are we getting that kind of representation? Because actually that's not necessarily the low income populations or the you know, the minoritized members of our community, but it actually just speaks to the fact that, you know, someone who's single and doesn't want to have to rent a 5-bedroom house or buy a 5-bedroom house doesn't have a lot of options in our community. I'm just kind of curious at your thoughts about that.
Sure. I think you're nicely forecasting some of the issues Tyler will be talking about a little bit later in the presentation. And also, I'll just refer back to the goals slide that I put up. My second slide, I've shown it to you every meeting. The first goal of this project is to implement the House bill. And the real gist of the House bill is to amend our zoning to allow more housing types in more places. And after we do that, and to the extent that we can do other things that are worthy goals, increase equity, increase diversity, increase affordability, we want to do that. But this zoning amendment cannot do all of those things by itself. So it has been a challenge, I think, to communicate that. But I personally find it very healthy and encouraging that all of the groups we've been talking to have been bringing up those larger issues. And so it's given us an opportunity to talk about how the zoning code fits in. It's one piece. It's one piece. Got to get that piece done and get it right. And then we need to keep working on all the other pieces.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay, any other questions for Mark or Terry? I think we can move on. And Terry, maybe this is a good time to check in, see if where people are with their schedules.
Sure, that'd be great.
I know we spent some extra time we hadn't anticipated. I know we're all busy and committed, but I just want to get a kind of a straw ballot here. Would anybody be able and or willing to stay over a few minutes if we needed to get through our material today? Is that, I mean, I can, but you know, this is my life. Commissioner Borowski, yes.
That was just me raising my hand that says I can.
Oh, your virtual hand. Oh, you're so clever. So I think I saw everyone's hands up. Is that Commissioner Isaacson? Did I catch you too?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
15 minutes at max. I have time.
Okay, so thank you. So Terry, you have 15 extra minutes. Let's go.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Kate and let them walk you through the rest of the material.
All right, and Kate and I are going to kind of tag team this, and Kate is going to help me out by running our slides for us. So thank you, Kate. So I'm just going to do kind of a quick review on not all of these key questions because we've talked about these previously, but just note a couple of them where we have some different information or kind of an updated recommendation. And so that's going to be the question of detached plexes and the item on special area zones. So on detached plexes, we don't have necessarily a change to our recommendation. I think from a staff or team perspective, we would still recommend allowing for those. And there was, I will say, kind of different opinions on that among you all last time. We are going to show you these test fits in just a moment that we talked about last time, kind of diagrams of how things look on the screen. And we are expecting to get some more feedback from the developers roundtable later. So I'll be interested if people have any additional comments on this, but we don't have necessarily a change on that from staff other than some additional information that you'll see on the test fits. Special area zones, we had some discussion about that last time in terms of a general recommendation. I think at this point, the staff or team recommendation is to essentially exempt middle housing from special area zone standards in most cases, and apply the base zone standards. One of the things that I can't remember if we talked about it last time, but it came up for sure since that meeting, was that the Walnut Station special area zone in particular, staff has determined is really implementing a commercial comp plan designation. And so the middle housing OARs would not have to apply there. You can just retain the standards there. To me personally, that's the special area zone that's sort of the most different in terms of how different design and development standards are applied there. And so that maybe becomes a non-issue. And I'm sure we'll have more discussion about this as we move forward. But those are some kind of quick updates on these overall questions. And Terry, I don't know if you have anything to add to that or refine. Is that?
Nope, I think that's good.
Okay, so I guess maybe I'll just quick pause just to see if anybody has any comments on these overall questions and initial recommendations.
I'm going to jump in. I had two comments on that, and because I'm not entirely sure about the process we're following, but you may have covered it. As I read through your notes about duplexes, I see your recommendation is still there, but I didn't see anything what you just said. Was it several of us had some questions about attached versus detached, and for me, circling back to Mark and the equity panel, how does it affect affordability? And I think we hear some more of that from Tyler today. So that was my issue about duplexes. I just wasn't sure if my comments had been recorded. I heard you say them, but I didn't see them in the record. So maybe that's just, I need to relax about that. And then if you could at some point explain, you're using the word exempt for special area zones. And I don't know what that means. I'm sorry, but maybe by giving a specific example, you could help me with that.
Okay, I'll try to respond to your last question real quick. I think when we say exempt, we mean rather than applying the special area zone standards related to, for instance, lot size or height or things like that, we would apply the base zone standards instead. And I think that's what we mean by that. Is that correct?
Maybe. I mean, again, my issue was I don't think the special area zones should put at risk our ability to build middle housing. So if we're doing that, I'm okay. I just didn't understand the term. I don't know, and I don't need to get into it today, but that was my question about the terminology and how you were phrasing it. I thought if we could go back into the special area zones and sort of tweak the parts that were interfering with middle housing, but leave the rest of it alone, then I'd be good. But I don't know if that's what you're doing or not. So anyway, enough from me. Commissioner Borowski, followed by Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you. Yeah, my question also is regarding the special area zones. In the presentation last week, you talked about special area zones, and there were some special area zones that had design standards that may not affect, lot coverage and those types of things. They're more aesthetic types of things, window facings, this and that wouldn't have precluded building missing middle housing. And you're saying we don't want to go back and look at those types of standards and see if they apply. And I guess for me, I don't know if I'm really okay with that. I would like us to look at those and see how many of the standards in these special area zones that people did a lot of work on to get to could apply without restricting getting things built. That's my first comment on the special area zones. And then the second thing is, if we are planning on exempting all special area zones, there needs to be some sort of public outreach to these people that help develop these and these neighborhoods that these special area zones are in, so that they know, well, I thought that we had these design standards put in and now they're going away. So there has to be some outreach so that there's not a surprise when somebody goes and builds something and they think, well, wait, I spent 3 years trying to develop this neighborhood plan and now it doesn't apply. So those are a couple of the comments that I have.
Commissioner Beeson, followed by Commissioner Taylor.
Thanks. A couple of things, I guess, with respect to special area zones. I think people are saying this. I'd like us to just sort of in the material kind of rephrase that instead of saying we're exempting them. I had kind of the same question. I think we should just say pretty directly that we're, and the way I'm understanding it is, we're going to go through and apply the base zone standards we come up with and make sure they comply. We'll go through, make sure if there's any other things in the special area zone standards that would restrict the development of middle housing code or middle housing, we'll address that. And I think everything else they've got, it would just remain and we'd leave it alone. So that's the way I think I understood it last time. With respect to duplexes and splitting them up, I've had some issue with that. I've kind of let it go for the most part. I guess I'm thinking as we go through, we'll have additional chance to talk about it. But you know, it seems to me what I'm looking at in all the material coming from staff and what I see that came through from the state and in the Oregon administrative rules is that we're kind of on a track in Oregon to say you can take a duplex and split it into 2 houses. So I'm just kind of wanting to watch how we proceed with that, but I think I'm all right. And I guess a subject came up just quickly, it came up earlier in terms of what we're going to be doing as we go forward. I think we're going to definitely, we've got additional time on this meeting, which is good, but I think we're going to definitely need time to go through and do this work and look at these amendments. So the amendments themselves are going to come forward to us in May. I think Terry's got an additional meeting with to be determined time in June for us to talk some more. I guess I'm expecting, in reference to Commissioner Borofsky's question, I just want to really clarify what I'm expecting when we go through the amendments, that we're going to have an opportunity to talk about them specifically. And I think to the extent we can, you know, make it go through it, you know, in a way that pays attention to our time and so on. I'd like to see us be able to have straw votes or straw on some of that stuff so that we're taking some time to make some clear decisions on that and it's all documented. So that's what I've got there. Thanks.
Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. After last week's discussion, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this. I didn't do an exhaustive review, so maybe staff can respond, or definitely I'm willing to do my own, which I will, more exhaustive research. I'm inclined and really feel strongly that I would support what Matt and Kate are suggesting, which is exempting middle housing standards in all areas throughout Eugene. And really my focus goes back to what we've been hearing from the public, and Mark actually touched on it today. Each of these districts, even though they went through a process for the neighborhood association, there's a lot of voices in those processes that aren't actually heard. They're not heard because they have several jobs. They're living life. I like the way Mark said that. They're living life. They didn't necessarily attend. So there are unintended consequences of even design issues. We don't really have a holistic kind of design review in the city of Eugene like some other jurisdictions do. So what it starts to look like to me is there's an element of inequity. And I like the way the state is approaching this. And personally, based on what we've heard so far from a lot of the groups, is I would like to encourage us, incentivize, and basically have middle housing be exempt in all of these areas. And I do know the Walnut Mixed Use Station a little bit more, just because actually I was involved in that process as a neighbor, very involved. And it is interesting. It's a form-based code approach. I still, which I agree, I appreciate staff's time on that. If there are elements that potentially we might want to address that potentially has, some of the detail that might, even though it's form-based, get more consistent with what would happen throughout the city of Eugene, assuming that we are kind of ubiquitous in our application, I would suggest us doing that, even with Walnut Mixed Use Station, to the extent that we can.
Oh, Commissioner Isaacson, yes.
I'm in agreement with Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Borowski on, I think his point is well taken on the advocacy and being able to get it out there for folks. I almost wonder if we shouldn't start roping in some of the neighborhood associations that are more active to let them be kind of a conduit and invite them in. And it might be a good gateway to kind of poke them in terms of getting their own plan together. I know River Road is well advanced in theirs, but some of the other ones need a little bit of work. And so it might be a good way to have us develop a dialogue with them. And I don't know if we want to create a liaison to have that or just do a blanket statement out to them, but that might be a good way to do it.
Okay, any other questions at this point? So let's push forward then.
All right, and I'm just going to say I appreciate all the comments on those things, especially special area zones, and we could spend the whole rest of the meeting talking just about that. But we are going to push through on some of the other things we wanted to present to you today and take everything we heard under advisement as we move forward and continue to talk about this stuff. So last time we talked to you, we told you we were doing some test fits of different configurations of the various middle housing types. I'm going to say a few words about these generally, and then I'm going to run through these individual diagrams pretty quickly. So we did several of these test fits for each housing type other than row houses, because they are just kind of a different animal and pretty straightforward, and it didn't, for the most part, seem like they lent themselves to this in the same way that the plexes and the cottage clusters do. In doing these, there's like an unlimited number of variations we could have looked at. What we tried to do was vary a number of different types of particularly development standards, keep others essentially constant. So we varied parking, we varied lot size, and we varied things in terms of showing some attached and detached forms of the plexes in particular. We essentially kept setbacks the same because your setback standards are pretty, they don't allow for, frankly, a ton of variation. So we kept those the same. We generally kept kind of the max lot coverage standard the same, although you'll see at least one where we bumped that up. And we generally tried to show you or do a test fit. And when I say we, this was Sarah Architects did the bulk of this work with some coordination and guidance from the rest of the team. So we tried to show in these at least one kind of allow option, so you could kind of get a sense of what that looked like, and then one incentivize option for each housing type, and then something typically somewhere in between. So I'm going to kind of run through these quickly. And then I'm going to give you a few observations on what we saw in the duplex and the cottage cluster test fits. We'll talk about and show you that triplex and the fourplex or quadplex test fits after we talk about the standards for those. So I'll do these. Kate will talk about the standards for those forms of housing, and then we'll show you the test fits again. These test fits, we are primarily showing you 2D plan view diagrams. And then we had a selected number of them where we did some kind of 3D perspective illustrations. In the 3D illustrations, we dropped in kind of like a kind of typical single family detached home on the lot next door, just for perspective and scale. So that's my intro to the test fits. I see Commissioner Taylor has a question, maybe. I do want to run through these pretty soon here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a question. I'm just going to clarify that setback there shown is actually not accurate. So the setback in the front yard is actually 10 feet from the porch. What's being shown there looks like maybe a garage setback. So I just wanted you to know, actually that porch is allowed to come. So a structure can be 10 feet from the property line. It's just the garage. So just as a nuance.
Okay, appreciate that. And there probably are other things that we didn't get exactly right. So I'd say point those out either today or later, and bear with us on these. So again, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. I'll just run through all of them for duplexes and cottage clusters. I'll make a few observations, and then I'll just see if y'all have any comments or questions or want to go back and look at any of these. First one is a duplex. This is sort of the allow option. It's a 4,500 square foot lot. 2 attached units, 2 off-street parking spaces assumed to be in garages in this case, with a shared driveway. These are attached units, and pretty decent sized units. 1,600 square feet per units is what we end up with when we show this on this size lot with those other standards.
Actually, Matt, sorry to jump in. I think I must have had a copy paste error when I was making this slide, but it's actually 2,200 square feet.
Oh,
2,250 square feet per unit.
Yes, even bigger than I said. Thank you. All right, next one. This is sort of essentially another version of that allow option, but this is showing you a version with detached units. In this case, the detached units are 1,600 square feet in size. We showed the parking configuration as 2 surface spaces. And you'll see in both of these cases that we did not hit the maximum allowable lot coverage. They're both below the allowed 50%. Next one. This is on essentially the incentivized lot option. We did show 1 surface parking space on this just to see kind of how that impacted the size of the units. And with a parking space in there, we still, with the setbacks, didn't exceed the maximum lot coverage, which is 50%. So it's still below that. If we didn't have that parking space, we could potentially get above 50%. Unit size is about 1,000 square feet. So this is kind of the smallest lot that we were considering in terms of the code standards. And this is an attached configuration. And next one I think is, so this is sort of a 3D rendering of what we just showed you on the plan view for this particular option. So it just gives you a sense of what that looks like from that view. And the other thing we kind of generally kept constant on these was the number of stories, and kept it between 2 and 2.5 on all these. So next one. This is kind of similar option, but with detached units. So you see the size of the units dropped a little bit, not a ton, went from 1,000 down to 900 square feet because you've got some additional space between the buildings, but it wasn't as, it's about a 10% drop. Again, we showed a parking space here. We ended up with about 40% lot coverage because of the space between the buildings and assuming one off-street parking space on this one. Next one, this is just showing that same option in 3D in a perspective drawing. Next one. So I'm going to show you a few cottage cluster options. This is essentially the allow option. In all of these cottage cluster test fits or diagrams, we kept the average size of the unit at 900 square feet. I'm pretty sure that's correct. We'll see as we go through, but I think that's right. In this case, this is what the state recommends, is the minimum lot size, but you can go below that and you'll see some options where we do, but this is a 7,000 square foot lot. We fit 4 units without too much trouble on here, plus 4 parking spaces on the site. We end up with a pretty low lot coverage. There's no lot coverage standard in the administrative rules. And in fact, it's the administrative rules say you can't apply a maximum lot coverage standard for cottage clusters because of all the other things that need to go into the development standards here. This is just showing what that one looks like in 3D. This one, we essentially added a cottage to what we showed you a moment ago, and just to see, could we fit one more in there on this size site, on a 7,000 square foot size site? We can fit another one in. We can add another parking space if you were to require one off-street space per unit. That's not what we're recommending in terms of the different options, but we wanted to show you what these different options looked like. And someone could still build this even if you allowed them to build this on a smaller lot. So again, fairly low lot coverage, and we still have the cottages at an average of 900 square feet, but they vary a little bit in size here. So we got a couple that are smaller and some that are larger. Next one. This is, I think, is actually test fit 4. This is more towards the incentivize option. So this is the smaller of the lot sizes that we tested. So 4,500 square foot lot. We've still got 4 cottages. We still kept the average unit size at 900 square feet. One of them smaller, 3 are bigger. We've got parking at a half a space per unit, so 2 off-street spaces. We've still got a common courtyard area in between the 4 units. And so if you allowed this size lot, this number of units, the average 900 square foot size, and parked the spaces up front, you can accommodate all that on a lot this size. And that was partly really what we wanted to kind of test with this one in particular. Next one. That's just kind of showing a 3D version of that one. And I think I have just one. Oh, that was my last one. I was thinking maybe we had one more of those, but I guess not. So I'll stop there and just see if y'all have any questions. Oh, actually, I'm going to make a few quick observations and then see if you have any questions or comments. So a few things that are kind of our quick summary observations. One, you know, if you increase the allowable lot size, you're going to get larger units at those. This is pretty obvious, but I'll say it anyway. At the lower minimum lot sizes, the units end up being smaller, but not extremely small. You know, they're still in the kind of 900 to 1,100 square foot range. And you'll see the same thing when we look at the triplexes and quadplexes. It's kind of hard to actually get above a lot coverage of 50% with these scenarios we looked at. If you were not requiring any parking on the site, then raising the allowable lot coverage would kind of get you something. It would get you slightly larger units. Allowing for the detached units does reduce the size of the units, but not by very much, frankly. You know, I noted we can fit 4 cottages on the incentivized lot with a couple of off-street spaces. And you could fit more on a larger lot, like a 7,000 square foot lot. So that's my quick observations, at least on duplexes and cottage clusters.
Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. Kate, Matt, I know that this is Herculean what you're doing and then coordinating with Sarah. So staff, I just want to, I think just for the public, because these are lots that obviously people might own, just so they're giving correct information. For instance, the setback for the parking is really only in the TOD overlays, transit overlay districts. It looks like it's a 5-foot setback, which is not an accurate setback for the majority of the lots throughout the city. Things like that, just so that when we're representing it to the public, especially if they pull it out, that they understand kind of what the real parameters are. Now, that doesn't mean that those might not change. So parking's another one, and this is where I'm just not clear. So the parking presented, like in the last option, you've got a 50% reduction. That 50% reduction is not allowed currently unless you have an adjustment review, which is actually quite an expensive process for people to go through. So unless we adjust parking standards, that actually can't even move forward. So just making sure that as we talk about this, or as these are passed around the public, because they are public record, that there's some good documentation on it, just in case individuals get a hold of these documents. I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, appreciate those comments. That the one thing I'll say in response is that we were not tying these to existing code standards. We were tying these to the allow, incentivize, or encourage standards that we've been talking to you all about and presenting to see how things would fit or shake out on the ground for those standards, not for your existing code standards, not on somebody's existing lot necessarily, but on a lot that fits the sizes and the setbacks and the parking standards that we've been presenting to you under these different options. So I think you're right. We do need to make that really clear to people so that they're not wondering, well, that's not what's allowed in my neighborhood. That's, you're right. And they would be right. So we need to be clear.
Yeah, it's totally understood, Matt. It's just being careful, like, if we're talking about number of units, there are other codes. So just making sure it's clear on those diagrams that the setbacks, which are the elements shown that are being proposed to change. So there is, yeah, exactly. So if it's all of them, awesome. Okay.
We assume 5-foot interior setbacks and 10-foot front setback across the board, because that's what we're assuming in the alternatives we've been presenting to you.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. One of the questions that I had, and maybe Commissioner Taylor could help out with this as well, is in the duplex under the incentivize, one of the things that I didn't see represented in these schematics was the difference between 30 feet and 35 feet and what that means. I mean, what is that extra 5 feet? Does that mean 3 stories? Real world, what are we talking about when we're incentivizing that along corridors? Because to me, 5 feet seems small, but obviously in the building trade, if we're looking at that as an incentivization, can somebody explain to me what that 5 feet incentive means real world?
I mean, I'll say it does make it easier to get you to 3 stories. It depends on kind of where the grade is or where the elevation is at the start of the first floor. I mean, that's kind of that, and the overall height are going to determine how many stories you get in and how much space you need between floors. I mean, it's not a super simple question, but in general, yes, 35 feet is going to allow you most of the time to get to 3 stories.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, that's I would have said that too. 35, it actually, I think offers that additional 5 feet, actually offers some nice opportunity to potentially even get a better design within 3 feet, or at 3 stories, sorry, not 3 feet. So 30 feet, still you can get 3 stories. It's just that extra 5 feet adds some flexibility in terms of design.
So I just had a question about telling the story here again. A 4,500 square foot is I think pretty typical, but I have a limited view of Eugene because I grew up and lived in the same neighborhood for like 50 years. So what I know is what's here. There may be all different kinds of shaped lots. But my question is, if it's a 4,500 square foot lot and it's divided in half, so you get 2 smaller lots, the way you can arrange the buildings is different from what you showed as a 2250 lot. And that's a big deal. So if we could track that, I know that's just adding an extra layer of complication, but it helps to tell the story of, well, here's a typical lot, here's a house, you scrape it, you can put these things on it, you can put these things on it, or you can add on to that typical house, or you can subdivide that typical house. So there's all kinds of ways we can get, again, my thing's affordability. How can we get to affordable units? So.
Yeah, I think it's really important to point those things out. You know, like I say, we could have done unlimited numbers of these things, and we had to kind of pick a reasonable number that we could get done in enough time to present to you, and within sort of the time and scope. But yeah, we do need to let people know that there's lots of other ways.
It helps me in conversations with people when you're saying that you can point at a lot and go, look, that lot right there could have XYZ on it, and their eyes light up. They're like, what?
Yeah.
And so they don't really get it yet. And so the quicker we can tell the story, the better. So Commissioner Beeson.
I want to make, I guess, a general comment, and given some of the discussion about some of the detail here. I've gone through this stuff, and and I think I tried to say this last time, I'm very supportive of us as we go through and do this work to develop the particular standards around these amendments, that I'm finding myself wanting us as much as we can to push towards the encourage, incentivize side of the scale. And for some of the reasons I think I'm kind of hearing in the conversation that to the extent we can do that in terms of, say, building height or lot size or parking and so on, we're allowing developers, I think we're providing a way for them to have, I guess, kind of more options to provide middle housing that's affordable, maybe smaller units, a wider variety of options, and so on. I say that also, I guess just want to acknowledge, I know there will be discussion about this in the community as we go forward. So as I think about our process, when we're doing this, we're then going to go through the code amendments in May and June, and then we're going to put it out for a very formal, substantial public review process. And I think as we communicate that, people will be able to really weigh in and talk about these. But I am support. I've gone through all as we go through all this. I guess I'm supportive of us trying to provide allowance for flexibility and getting the middle housing put in place. Thanks.
I've got Commissioner Taylor followed by Commissioner Borowski.
I think I can be skipped. I'll just wait.
Okay. Skipping ahead then. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. I guess one of my questions harks back to our comments from the equity people, and they were talking about, they wanted to make sure that these types of housing were dispersed throughout the community. And I'm looking at all these drawings and I'm seeing them all on flat ground plats. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to topography, and that a lot of our lots in the city of Eugene are on hills. And is there ways that the incentives will help to get these types of housing built on ground that is not flat? Because if it only is being incentivized on flat ground, it's only going to go into the areas that aren't in South Eugene, where there's hills that may limit these types of things. Has anybody given any thought to that and looked at those types of renderings?
We haven't yet, but another thing I was thinking while y'all were talking is that I think you're familiar with the pre-approved plans that staff is working on for ADUs. That is something we have thought about doing for other housing types after the code amendments are adopted or further along, and we have, a code that we think is a code that is proposed for adoption. We can start working on that and use some scenarios from different parts of the city, including topography. It's a good comment. Thank you.
Can I just add that I think part of the recommendation for allowing detached duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes or fourplexes is an acknowledgement of the fact that not every site is flat, and it might be easier to make detached units work on a sloped site where you don't have to connect the walls.
Yeah, and I would just add the same would go for sites that are irregularly shaped and or where you've got an existing unit and you want to be able to add a second unit. I think that's, if we want to promote flexibility, even if the units aren't always the cheapest, that's one of the reasons to allow for the detached, or those are all reasons, I guess, to allow for the detached. So I would just add that.
Yeah. Commissioner Taylor.
I just want to reiterate what Kate and Matt said. I agree. I think detached allows for that flexibility that we've wanted. It does have the ability then to respond to the context of the site and surrounding area. And the other thing I want to ask, if this is within the consideration, which I don't think it's been addressed, or maybe it has and I've missed it. Currently, small lots require a cluster subdivision or a PUD. Has the team or staff considered removing the PUD or cluster subdivision and allowing small lots at 2,500 square feet? I would like to see that consideration made.
I think short answer is yes.
Commissioner Ramey, I raised my hand.
Oh, I know, but you spoke. I thought, well, maybe she didn't. Okay.
I
Yes.
spoke and then I didn't put it down
Yes,
because
Carrie, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to make a suggestion because Tyler is here and we've made it about only halfway through Matt and Kate's slides, that we let them finish the whole presentation and then have a discussion about those topics after they finish. Can we do that? Okay, awesome. Back to you, Matt and Kate.
All right, and really back to Kate, because she's going to talk about at least the next couple of slides, and then I'll run through some more test fits after that.
All right, let me get myself in order here. I had jumped backward to look at something. Okay, triplexes and fourplexes. So I think this table should look pretty familiar to you from the last work session because it's pretty similar to what we recommended for the other housing types. So generally we're recommending, encouraging triplexes and fourplexes across the residential zones, and then further relaxing the standards within transit corridors within a quarter mile of frequent transit lines. I think Matt touched on this, but for setbacks, we're generally recommending keeping those consistent. The standards are already pretty modest, 10 feet in the front, 5 feet on the side and rear. For lot coverage, we've also kind of talked about this. Our initial recommendation was to keep the existing 50% lot coverage for triplexes and fourplexes, although we did mention that the test fits might inform that recommendation. And when we get into the test fits for triplexes and fourplexes in just a minute, you'll see that at least one of the tests did look at a 60% lot coverage standard. And for the most part, I think other factors like setbacks and parking have driven the lot coverage to be lower than 50%. But for fourplexes, if there's no parking required, they are actually able to max out that 60% lot coverage. So that might be something that's worth considering, potentially allowing additional lot coverage, maybe only on smaller lots that are near transit lines. That would be one option to consider, and then keeping the 50% lot coverage in other parts of the zone and for larger lots. So I think we're still kind of discussing how these pieces fit together and what how these test fits might inform our recommendations there. And then quickly for design standards, again, similar to the other housing types, we're recommending pulling in some of the model code design standards for these housing types. As we've already mentioned a couple times before, the model code has a pretty basic set of standards for design. They're mostly pretty flexible compared to design standards that you see out there, especially compared to like the special area zones, and also compared to the current multifamily standards, which currently apply to triplexes and fourplexes. This would be a pretty big step down in terms of how sort of onerous and restrictive those standards are. Okay, so that's actually all I have for for my piece, and I'm going to throw it back to Matt to talk about the test fits.
All right, so I don't quite as many test fits to show you on triplexes and fourplexes, but I'll run through them. This is the first, we did one for triplexes. That's again kind of the allow option, and this really is just to compare these and see what we get when we get to the incentivize or encourage option with a smaller lot size, with less parking, et cetera. Kind of how that affects unit size. Can we fit things on those other lots? But in this case, we've got a 5,000 square foot lot. We've got 3 parking spaces on site in the form of garages. And we end up with 1,100 square foot units. And we don't exceed that 50% lot coverage. We're still below that max, given the space we need for setbacks and for the ability to get access to the parking, even though the parking is within the buildings. So next one, this is just we did a 3D graphic of how that one looks on a site. You can kind of see where the driveway is to get back to the parking there on the back side or the interior side. this is a fourplex that's, again, kind of along the lines of the allow option because it's a 7,000 square foot lot. It includes 4 parking spaces. These are surface parking spaces. We end up with, pretty decent sized units here. I would say 1,250 square foot average unit size. I think, yeah, and again, didn't exceed that 50% lot coverage standard. Next one's a 3D version of that. And I think I heard some comments maybe from staff when we showed them this one that they weren't super psyched about how this looked, but I thought about it a little bit later and I will identify a couple counterpoints to that. One is that the parking is all kind of interior. So you're not seeing the parking from the street, which I think is actually kind of nice. You get more windows and doors facing the street. We did show this on a potentially you could think of this as a corner lot, or you could think of it as a house to the right. But either way, you've got kind of the parking hidden back there. But it is kind of a little bit of a funky, bulky looking structure because this is the attached version, as were a couple of the triplex ones. So next one. This is the incentivized version of a fourplex and here we're assuming 4 units and they're stacked, so we've got 2 ground floor units, 2 upper floor units, 0 parking spaces on this, and this is on a 4,500 square foot lot. So that's the incentivized size of lot. Here we did allow the lot coverage to go up to what we could fit within the setbacks. And we did get up to the 60% lot coverage here because we didn't have any parking on site or off street. So raising that lot coverage standard for this incentivized option where you don't have off-street parking will allow you to get fit somewhat bigger units, on the site. If you were requiring some off-street parking, you would end up with probably quite a bit smaller units because of needing to get the parking space and the access in there. So I'll just note that. Next one, this is just a 3D version of that one. And this is, I think, kind of a more traditional configuration of a fourplex for Eugene and for some other communities that we've been working in as well. Those were all of them. I think I feel like we might have a couple more that we didn't put into the presentation on tris and quads. But those were some we wanted to be sure and show you in terms of kind of the 2 ends of the allow and incentivize spectrum. All right.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Switching gears to row houses, and we just have a couple more slides, and then we can finish and pause for discussion. So again, row houses pretty consistent in terms of recommendations for development standards. And I won't get into too much detail here except to talk about lot area and density for row houses. So on this next slide, so for row houses, that's the one middle housing type that the state rules allow cities to actually place some limits to sort of apply their maximum density standards. All the other middle housing types have to actually be exempt from maximum density. And so that just your minimum lot sizes would control density for those other types. But for row houses, cities are allowed to limit density to either 4 times the maximum density that would apply to a single family detached home, or 25 units per net acre, whichever is less dense. So we included Eugene's current standards here, which are 1,600 square feet per lot in all the residential zones. And then I listed the maximum density standards here. So for the R1 zone, just for minimum compliance, the maximum density would have to bump up to 25 units per acre. And the largest minimum lot size that cities can apply is 1,500 square feet. So there will have to be at least some decrease in lot sizes. But then for the encourage approach, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. There are more options to consider there. So our initial recommendation would be to reduce the minimum lot area to 1,125 square feet, which is equivalent to basically 4 townhouse lots or row house lots made out of every 4,500 square foot sort of single family lot, or 2,250 square foot small lots. So kind of trying to keep the math consistent there. But if you don't limit density in some way in the zones, you end up with about 39 units per acre, if that's your minimum lot area. So that would be a pretty significant increase in density, even for the R2 zone, which currently has a maximum density of 28 units per acre. So we kind of wanted to bring this to you and ask sort of what level of density you might be comfortable with supporting. Because that would be, I mean, 39 units per acre would be quite a bit more dense than any other allowable housing type, including multifamily in those zones. So a couple options we wanted to kind of put forward. One is just to keep, for the R1 zone, to keep that density capped at 25 units per acre, which would already be a pretty significant increase over the current allowance. And the way that the density and lot area would interplay would mean that you couldn't necessarily build as many lots or build as many row houses as sort of land area you have. It would kind of be limited by the density. Another potential option would be to limit the number of row houses in a development that could be created at that smaller lot size. So for example, you could say you can build up to 8 row houses at that smaller lot size of 1,125. But then if you get above 8, you have to increase your lot size. So that would just be kind of a way to allow those smaller lots, but to kind of place some sort of sideboards on it. And then the third option would be the sort of most flexible option, which is to say there's no maximum density, you're just controlled by that minimum lot size. And then the incentivized approach would, our sort of recommendation there is to say there's really no minimum lot size, there's no maximum density, you're just kind of allowed to do as much as you can do based on the size of the site you have within, you know, a certain distance from transit. So it's a lot to chew on. I guess I'll do my last slide before we open it up to discussion. So in addition to design standards for row houses, there's also the option to limit the number of row houses. Sorry, I skipped forward, or I didn't skip forward. There's an option to limit the number of row houses that can be attached in a single structure or in a single sort of grouping of row houses. And cities are allowed to limit that as long as you allow at least 4 units to be attached. So our recommendation is sort of in the encourage column, which would be to limit the number of units to 10 row houses in R1, and then not to limit the number in the other zones. And then the size of a development would really be limited by other standards like block length and connectivity requirements. And then for design standards, those are pretty consistent with other housing types we've talked about. Pursue the model code approach, and it's sort of a limited set of design standards that would apply. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing and see if folks have questions or comments.
I've got Commissioner Beeson, followed by Commissioner Edwards.
So I'm going back a bit, Kate, to minimum lot coverage, triplex and duplex. And I guess I just want to clarify what the recommendation at this point is from you guys. When I looked at the material, I guess what I was seeing was it was kind of in the base zone. The recommendation was to stay at the 50% lot coverage. And then I wasn't sure under near transit. I mean, I see the recommendation out there under incentivized to go up to 60 or 70%, but it wasn't clear to me what the actual recommendation was. And I think I would be in the camp of in the near transit areas to allow the higher percentage lot coverage. But I guess my specific question is, is the recommendation just staying at 50 in both near transit and in the base zone?
So that was kind of our first recommendation, was to keep it at 50%.
Mhm.
But that was, but we were kind of getting the materials to you at the same time that these test fits were coming in from Sarah, where we felt like we didn't have all the information yet to change that recommendation. So, and I don't think we've officially changed our recommendation from 50% yet, but I do think that there is some support for potentially increasing it maybe to 60% near transit lines on those smaller lots.
Okay, well, I support that. I've got a couple of additional things that I'm going to hold, and you can come back to me. Thanks.
Commissioner Edwards and then Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I have something that I kind of more or less want to really just kind of draw attention to. It's related to the transit lines and the incentivizing. I'm super supportive of that. And I certainly want to see that incentivize middle housing along transit lines. I guess my question or my caution is the transit system is subject to change. And so while we, during COVID, there were routes that were cut, and I think LTDs has every intention of bringing back those routes, but I think it's more likely that we're going to see expansion of service over time. And so I would want to kind of maybe explore how we would address that, so that there may be a line that is added 5 years from now that would not be included in the way that we look at apply this type of zoning. And then also to try to avoid having that land use policy tied to transit planning can become political. So where you have areas of town that aren't currently served by transit that might not want that if it meant some zoning changes for them. And so I think that it's just something to kind of put on your radar as a way that, something that we'll want to figure out how to address. For the most part, the transit system is pretty solid and those lines are pretty well established. But like I said, they will expand over time, I would expect, and occasionally can change and things like that. So just, that was my wanted to flag that issue.
Just to respond quickly, and Terry, you can jump in too, but I think my understanding is that the intention is it would be adaptable if new frequent transit lines are put in place, because the code would sort of reference the adopted maps from Lane Transit District. And so whenever new frequent transit lines come in that would meet the criteria, those areas would also be included. Is that right, Terry?
Yeah, that's how it's proposed currently. But as you know, ongoing work is required to coordinate land use and transportation. So we need to be careful with how we write that into the code.
Commissioner Taylor, and then we're back to Commissioner Beeson.
I have a lot of thoughts. So one, I'm just going to reiterate in terms of the drawings, because I realized, so sorry. I realized I didn't even get the drawings, because I think they are reflecting a 5-foot side rear yard setback, interior yards, and then 10 in the front. I was looking at the setback from parking and jumped to trying to figure out the scale of your drawing. So I think if I have to do that, we definitely don't want the public doing that, because I'm really familiar with the code. So I think telling the story is going to be really important, especially because I think a lot of people are going to look at, what do I have now? What can I do now? And what is this change? So I know that's how I have to communicate about it, because if it's the same, let's make sure that that's communicated. If it's different, is it 1 feet or is it 1 foot? And so just really working on the communication, because this is going to obviously be very sensitive. So that's one piece. Next is, I like the larger lot sizes. You had the example of the fourplex with the 60% lot coverage, and it did not have parking, but actually it could. Let's say it had alley access. You could actually embed all of those cars in that bottom floor on, because it's a stacked fourplex, 2 on the bottom floor, 2 on the top, you could embed those parking, you'd still have 60% lot coverage. So I like some flexibility, because I don't also want to assume that all cars are going to be parked on the exterior surface parking. So I think I like that. I like that you explored that. And like you said, Matt, there's always thousands of versions about what this can look like. So, so the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of R1, which I always try to think about, is scale. So you can have a 5,000 square foot single family house. So let's look at scale. Let's look at the frontage. Let's look at, so there's 10 row houses in a row. What's that linear foot really when you look at the balance of the other code requirements? It could be quite, I mean, some of your examples are great. They fit in really well into the neighborhood. So I guess I just have more things to think about. I am definitely going to be looking at how can we get more housing. I also have the same comment in terms of Commissioner Edwards about tying land use with transportation, because I would actually like to see this middle housing not just happen along corridors. I think we have capacity for more density that's not just along the corridor. Get deeper into these neighborhoods, allow that density to occur. And I think it will break up some of the inequities in terms of where's the transit located, where is it not located? And I always go back to Joe Minicozy, who I really was impacted by his presentation. If we've got really expensive infrastructure serving 5 houses way off, away from these corridor, I'm giving that example, you know where I'm talking about, maybe on the edges, I'd love to see density there. Is it next to a transit corridor? No. So I think I just am going to be thinking about it from that perspective. I do recognize the sensitivities. This is a big change. So let's just look at design, kind of what that scale is, because I'd like to see this, like I said, deeper in the neighborhoods, not just on corridors. Yeah.
I've got Commissioner Beeson, followed by Commissioner Borowski. Oh, Ken, you're muted, Ken.
Okay, I have a question. And before I ask my question, I want to voice support for what Commissioner Taylor just said. I've been thinking about that for a while. I guess the way to say it, I would be very supportive to the extent we can be looking to relax the standards in wider areas than just near transit. And I'm assuming that's fraught with all sorts of discussion and detail, but I think just in general, I'd want to express support for what she said. I have a very specific question on row houses, and kind of lost my place here, so let me. What I thought I read on row houses, I'm sorry, I have a note here. There's a note in here that we're not going to, these are the recommendations, I understand, that we wouldn't allow row houses on flag lots. And I'm not sure I disagree with that at all, but it opened up sort of a box of questions for me, because when I went back and looked at, and I'm kind of familiar with some flag lots, by the way, I'll just disclose that. And they're long flag poles and they're lots at the end and they're narrow driveways. And so I found myself kind of thinking, I'm not trying to express an opinion here, I'm just going to ask a question. But the idea that if I'm reading everything right, we are allowing, under the recommendations, we'd be allowing, probably required to do this under the statute, allowing triplex, quadruplex, detached quadruplex and triplex and duplex and so on flag lots. And if that's true, that's one question. I'm assuming that if you detach them, and maybe otherwise, you could end up selling them as individual units. I was just kind of curious what the difference is with row houses and why we would call out row houses and say they're not allowed. That's my question.
I might need some help answering this one. I don't know if Jeff, if you have any thoughts on this one.
That's a pretty good question, Commissioner Beeson. I think if I had to really kind of noodle over this one, it would be that there will be design standards around row houses that will be much more specific and potentially not feasible on flag lots, which is probably why we initially were thinking about it this way. However, I'll just say that we probably need to consider that a little further and look at those standards to make sure that we don't end up with the wrong answer on that one.
Well, that's good. And I don't need to spend a lot of time on it today. I think it felt, and that's a good answer. It felt a little bit inconsistent to me. And I think just as we pull everything together, kind of address that.
Yeah, I think the feasibility is more likely that we'd see a quadplex or something like that develop as opposed to a traditional row house style development on a flag lot.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Borowski, followed by Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you. So you asked for some input on row houses and density and lot area. So for me, the recommendation that I would feel comfortable with would be option 1, which is increase the density in R1 to 25 units. That seems to me like a fair landing point as far as fitting this in. The other thing that I want to get out of this is, I think in reading, and this would come from the Echo Northwest things, but it seemed to me that the most affordable type of housing that's going to get built will be row houses. So whatever we can do to encourage row houses, I think that's where we're going to land if we're really truly looking for missing middle housing, the people that are in the 80 to 100% AMI. I think all of this work on duplexes, triplexes, cottage clusters, and quads is going to increase housing. And this is just a gut instinct for me. I don't know that it's really going to hit a lot of the missing middle that we're really shooting for. I think it will be more door fronts. But I don't know necessarily if it's going to be 80 to 100% AMI. I think that from the Eco Northwest studies, the row houses were the ones that would be the most economical and hit that. So whatever we can do to incentivize row houses, I think is our best shot at getting true missing middle housing. That being said, I believe that we need all sorts of housing. So if a duplex is going in and it's going to not hit 80 to 100% AMI, that it's going to hit 140% AMI, I'm still okay with that, because there are people at 140% AMI that need a place to live in our community. So that's just kind of my realism going on here. I think that if we are honest with ourselves and think that this is going to build a bunch of 80 to 100% AMI, we're kind of fooling ourselves. But it will get more houses built, and it will get more door fronts built. And more door fronts means people living in our community. So that's just where I'm at, and I would do whatever we can to incentivize the one that has been identified as the most likely to get us to the missing middle workforce housing.
Mr. Taylor.
So what I would like to encourage, and I have looked, maybe Lauren can talk about this. I actually think, based on House Bill 2001, there is not, if you put 3 townhouses together, it is a triplex. If you put 4 townhouses together, it is a fourplex. So there is, or can be considered, and I don't even know if codes can differentiate. So I guess that would be a question for Lauren. Hang on one second. So I can address this because I have actually several flag lot townhouses that I have been a part of the design. And they can work on flag lots, and often they are quite desirable. One of the big differences of townhomes is that you can rely, which is less expensive, you can rely on the Oregon Residential Specialty Code for townhouses, because from grade to the top of the roof, you can't commingle units. So one solid unit has to be from grade to the top of the roof. That's a definition of a townhouse from a building code standpoint that allows you to use the Oregon Residential Specialty Code. Now, the fourplex example that Matt had, that you have 2 units on the bottom floor, 2 units on the top, those are commingled. Because they're commingled, it's going to shift you to a different set of building code standards. So it actually gets more expensive and more complicated. So personally, I love to see if we can not differentiate with townhomes, with the exception of maybe some of the other elements, which is maybe extending beyond the fourplex. But essentially, a fourplex, is for townhomes. I don't really actually see the difference. So, Lauren, if you can kind of address that from a legal standpoint, especially how the legislature has written it, that'd be helpful.
Sure, Commissioner Taylor, I will try. I think the gist of your question is, is there ever overlap between the descriptions of the housing types? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, especially when you're talking about detached units. 4 detached units could be a cottage cluster or a quadplex, as you say. 4 attached units could be a quadplex or townhomes. But where they may start to differentiate from each other are the standards that apply to each of those housing types. And I think, as we talked about a while ago, depending on the recommendations, depending on Planning Commission's recommendation about the standards, there may be some either need or want to add some code language that requires an applicant to identify which housing type they are proposing if their proposal could fit into a couple of different slots, right? And then, think about whether that, once they've identified which housing type they're proposing, then it kind of stays that housing type throughout. That question comes up again in the context of Senate Bill 458 that we talked about last time, which is the Middle Housing Land Division Bill. So if you have, again, in particular, detached units that each sit on their own small lot, that starts to look more like detached single family housing, but that bill provides a mechanism for kind of carrying through the fact that it originated as middle housing and will continue to be treated as middle housing throughout its lifetime. So it can get complicated. And that's my very 10,000 foot view. Matt and Kate and Terry and Jeff probably have more to say.
Carrie has her hand up. She definitely has more to say. And if she doesn't say what I would say, I'll say it after she talks.
My comment is not about row houses. It's about making sure Tyler gets to talk. So real quick, Jeff, go.
I just wanted to really quickly specify that when we're talking about row houses, one of the key distinguishing factors here is that they're on individual lots. And I think that's something that's being forgotten.
Right.
One of the biggest distinguishing factors.
Great.
And triplexes and duplexes are not, and that is the primary distinguishing factor. There is actually not overlap in terms of the definition of them. So that's
okay. Perfect.
Terry, I'm gonna try to be quick here and then move us on because I know Tyler's here and we're down to our last 12 minutes here. So Commissioner Borowski is saying what I don't want to say, which is we're probably fooling ourselves. The only thing that's going to work is row houses, but I'm not willing to give up yet. And I am concerned that in the test cases, when we're incentivizing and encouraging, what we're doing is actually creating bigger units, not more units. So I thought the idea was to encourage more units. And while I recognize we're also allowing more flexibility, if it's not leading to more units, I'm not sure why we're doing that. I don't expect an answer today. Again, I'm just leaving you with problems, not solutions. But I would like, well, I'm going to let Taylor go ahead and talk to us, Tyler. Because I think there's a sweet spot in unit size, and if there's any way we can incentivize that unit size, That's what I want to do. Commissioner Beeson, yes, quickly.
I just, yeah, quickly, maybe, and I don't need an answer, I guess. In terms of what Matt was just saying, and Jeff, we're distinguishing row houses. Row houses are on individual lots. Okay, I get that. I'm thinking that if we have triplexes and quadruplexes on any lot, flag lot or not, and they are split into separate standalone units, there is opportunity at some point for people to parcel those off and to sell them. And I believe that's true. So if that is true, I guess I'm still seeing them as being somewhat similar. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, I will take this as my cue to jump into my part of the presentation. Chair Ramey, is that okay?
Yes, go.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. I am jumping in. We will do this quickly. Let me share my screen. I'll get this moving. All right, quick overview of some of the information that we provided in previous deliverables, memos to you all, as well as presentation. I want to do as a background, where it's a baseline to understand the question of what were we asked to do, what were we trying to get, and what questions we were trying to answer. So quick background, middle housing types are feasible across different neighborhoods of Eugene. Building for sale middle housing is more financially viable than rental housing in most areas. Townhomes are the most feasible middle housing types in most locations. And so the question that we were asked, or that we helped ask to some extent, is can the code options, so the differences between allow, encourage, incentivize, under consideration, help encourage middle housing at lower costs that would be attainable to households earning between 80 to 120% AMI, and really focusing on smaller rental households as part of this. And so the two answers to this question, the way that we're thinking about, is how can we get more smaller rental housing through the middle housing options, and at what price points could those come in at under the encourage, incentivize options. We were pretty limited in what we were looking at in terms of the code options. So we, as part of this analysis, we're looking at the lot size and the parking requirements specifically, but did have some interesting findings here that we're sharing with you all. So I'll start at a high level. In general, both the encourage and incentivize code options help create, or can help create, more smaller rental housing. So the encourage package improves feasibility somewhat, but incentivize helps noticeably more in making plexes with smaller units more feasible. And what we're doing here is seeing how under these different code packages, smaller rental units and plexes can compete with townhomes that are faring very well in the analysis, as well as with single family housing. With encourage, smaller rental units are roughly comparable in terms of financial feasibility with single family detached development. So that gets them up to the point of being able to compete with single family. And with incentivize, smaller rental housing is more feasible than single family detached development. Comparing that to townhomes, however, townhomes still outcompete smaller rental units, no matter how we look at it. But the encourage does help get us a little bit further. Incentivize option does get closer to competing with townhomes. So our sort of hypothesis that we started with these code options is bearing out in the results. The other part of our questions was, how does it improve feasibility? So we'll share this next slide with you. The thing to look at the bottom is at the bottom of the slide are the key takeaways, which are the AMI levels where housing is affordable under each of the code options. So the allow scenario with these smaller rental units, and we're holding unit size constant across these to be able to compare them. Allow 75 to 94% AMI for smaller rental units. Encourage slight improvements to affordability with 74% to 93% AMI, and the incentivize does increase the affordability, the likely affordability of these smaller rental units between 71% and 89% AMI. It is interesting findings here. One of the interesting things is that on the lower end of the spectrum, from 75 to 71, those are fourplexes. So the fourplexes are the ones that are going to be most feasible for smaller rental units and are the ones that are likely to create the most affordable rental units as well. And then this chart that we've brought up a few times with you all, just to show the rental range of AMI levels for different incomes across a 3-person household. So again, we're talking about 2-bedroom rental units, which is a 3-person household, generally in between about $1,100 to $1,500 a month in rental rates, in that range between again, about 71% to 90% AMI as the range. So I tried to keep things super high level and not dig into the weeds on residual land value this time. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, but this is what I have for today. I don't know if you want to take questions now or probably take questions now.
Well, Tyler, I just had one question. It looked like your models were based on 810 square foot units.
That's right.
And yet nothing I saw today was 810 feet. So,
yeah, so the maximum, so what we were looking at was at a 3-person household for a 2-bedroom unit, a unit type that is buildable within all of these prototypes that we're looking at, that is kind of a standard unit size. So you can build bigger units, but Chair Ramey, I think to answer or to add another point to the discussion that came up is that the more you increase the size or the overall size of the units or the bulk of the structure, the more it makes it feasible. Also, the less it could make it affordable in a nominal basis. So there are certainly some trade-offs between production and affordability once you go down this encourage incentivize track.
So I think to cut to the chase, if we could find a way to incentivize, encourage 810 square foot units, we believe those would be more affordable to our community.
I think if you were to, in the incentivize, if you wanted to look at incentivize and put some limitations on size of units within that, you could see more, it is possible to see more affordable rental units if you took that approach. Yeah. I would note that there are other jurisdictions in Oregon that have taken that approach as well, with some of their sort of bonus or incentivized options as part of middle housing.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Taylor.
Hi, I just wanted to let everyone know I have to leave in about 2 minutes, so I'll slip out. But I also wanted to, Jeff, your point was well taken in terms of ownership. And I know sometimes there can be some complexities around how the building code defines things and how land use does. So just being aware of that the building code has a clear definition from townhomes that is a little different because essentially it doesn't mean single ownership for each of them. You can actually have 4 townhouses in a row from the building code standpoint on one property. So just knowing there is a little bit of difference there. So you might want to follow up with the just building permit, or we can make I'm not sure the clarification needs to happen, but I just wanted you just to know that, or at least my understanding that's the case. And Tyler, thank you for your presentation. I love it. In terms of telling the story, I like the idea of potentially including some of those images because I actually, Matt, Kate, I appreciate those test fits. Honestly, when I talk to people, they're much more useful than words. They're easier for people to understand. So they're really important. That's why I've kind of keep talking about them, is that if we can represent a couple of other ideas that looks at maybe the smaller house type, just kind of varying kind of some of these test fits. And I know it might be outside the scope, so we can talk about that with staff, and they're really helpful. So thanks.
Mr. Fragola.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've heard numerous suggestions throughout the afternoon that moves us in the direction of smaller units, which we know is going to make them more affordable, like smaller lot sizes, allowing things to be detached. And I just would like to encourage us in this process to continually seek out and push towards those opportunities that are going to get us there. And I did just hear that is moving strongly into the encourage and incentivize zone of what we're allowing. And I am completely supportive of that. You don't need to get into the fine details about that, but I would just like staff to know that I'm supportive of exploring that. And I just heard Tyler say there are other cities in Oregon that have chosen to go that route. And I personally would like to know more information about that, even if it's just in a follow-up email.
Thank you. Okay, other comments from commissioners? I know that we're losing 2 commissioners here at least in another minute. Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I guess I'm intrigued by what Commissioner Ramey and what was brought up by Tyler about the size and incentivizing the smaller units. You know, the incentive, you know, if I'm a developer and I can build an 1,100 square foot apartment that I can rent for $1,800, or I can build a 900 square foot apartment that I can rent for $1,200, I'm going to build the bigger one and get more money for it. So Tyler said that there was a way to incentivize the smaller one. If we could get some examples of how that is done, whether that's lot coverage or whatever. And I don't want to hamper development, you know, by saying, okay, if we put something in, then nothing is going to get built. Because I would rather have an 1,100 square foot apartment built than nothing get built. So I want to know where that sweet spot is and what is working. Because if we put something in that we're striving for, but it doesn't pan out, then we're not getting where we want to be. So I appreciate these comments.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm suggesting, is that we look at incentivize and as a way to move us that way. We still outright allow the larger units, but is there a way we can get to the smaller units too?
Same here, with lots of flexibility involved.
Okay, anything else? Terry, next steps?
Yeah, thank you. Since we're so over, I'm not going to share my screen again. Your next steps are pretty simple. We're going to finish our April and May outreach meetings, including the developer focus groups, and come back to you on May 17th with refined recommendations. We are still trying to schedule a work session in June, and that's it. Thank you all.
Terrific. Thank you. Alyssa.
I'm going to pass mine and hold them for an email if there's anything that I haven't already emailed you about.
I think I agree with that. We're all going to gather on Thursday at, oh boy, 2 o'clock. So I look forward to that, and we'll see you then. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.